ladies and gentlemen, apes and sapiens alike, coming at you live from the heart of the Forbidden Zone. Put your hands together for talk of the Planet of the Apes.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. You don't have to clap so much. The clapping.
Lord,
Oh my goodness. Yes. Oh wow.
You're such a ham.
They're clapping for us, Muncher. They're clapping. It's because they're so excited to get back to talk of the Planet of the Apes, the first and only ever podcast to ever exist, and the last podcast to ever exist to talk about the Planet of the Apes movies.
Indeed.
I am one of your hosts. My name is Danny.
And I'm Winter.
And we are here to talk of the Planet of the Apes. Last week, or last episode, depending on how we're releasing it, I'm going to keep out of habit saying last week because this is a talk show and it airs once a week. And
sometimes.
Yeah,
Depends.
Exactly. We'll figure it out. We talked about the 1968 film Planet of the Apes, the classic starring Charlton Heston,
The first of our 5 that we will be discussing in this miniseries.
Exactly. This is a miniseries where we talk of the Planet of the Apes. We talk about we're going through the original 5 Planet of the Apes movies and discussing like their themes and like what we think and what they're about and just hanging out and having a good old ball of a time.
Hell yeah.
Monkeying around, enjoying ourselves.
What? I can't say no either. Don't you say that M word.
Right. This week, however, we're talking about the first sequel. We're talking about Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the 1970 film.
Ted Post.
Directed by Ted Post. Written by, writing by Paul Dean. And of course, it's based on the book by Pierre Boulle, as we talked about last week. And you want to know a fun fact about this one? I think it's the only sequel that Charlton Heston ever did. They had to pay him $1 million to do it.
Wow.
But
they really twisted his arm, huh?
Yeah, because he was like, I don't do sequels. And they were like, dude, please, we need you to do this. We need you.
Please.
And he was like, I'll do it if you give me $1 million. And they were like, here you go. I think the budget for this movie was only about $2 million.
That's crazy that they actually gained enough to pay him $1 million, because where we started is very different than where we are now.
Right. I mean, the last film was a hit.
Yeah.
So after the first movie came out, it was huge. And 20th Century Fox was like, money.
Yeah.
So they went to Rod Serling, the boy, the man, the creator of
Man, myth, legend.
Twilight Zone, who had a hand in writing a first draft of the previous movie. And they were like, yo, give us a script. And he was like, I'll think about it. Here are some ideas. I'm thinking that there's an ape-human hybrid. I'm thinking that we do all this stuff. Maybe Nova's pregnant again, all this stuff. And it's going to take me a while because I'm really busy with this TV show. But I'll get a script to you at some point. They looked at the script and they were like, all right, this guy's busy. He's going to take too long to write this. He's writing some weird, freaky shit about ape-human hybrid. I'm not into that. Maybe...
that's more of a Dr. Moreau.
Dr. Moreau?
Dr. Monroe, yeah.
Moreau.
Yeah.
Another French fucker. Another fucking French.
That's also another crazy story about animals and humans.
Right.
And science.
Well, speaking of another French, after Rod Serling wasn't able to produce it in time and said like he declined returning to write the script, they went to Pierre Boulle, the writer of the book.
Yes.
Asked him, hey, what would your sequel to Monkey Planet be?
Right.
And he wrote a draft for a sequel called Planet of the Men.
Huh.
Where George Taylor, the protagonist of the first film,
which also, it's just as a ADHD side note, sounds a lot like George Lucas. Just a thought.
George Lucas. George Lucas is like a film student at this time.
Yeah.
Like just like a 20-year-old.
But I think it's very fascinating. You keep referencing Star Wars.
Yeah.
If you listen to our previous episode, you'd hear Dan reference Star Wars, of course. A lot.
Yeah.
And it's just funny that you say that because of Taylor's first name. But in everything that I've seen, he's referenced as Taylor.
Yeah, Taylor's his last name. He's Colonel George Taylor.
Right.
So George Lucas, his only relation to Planet of the Apes is that when he was going to make Star Wars, he noticed that the Planet of the Apes films were making a bunch of money selling merchandise, lunchboxes to
Mhm.
kids. This is something we didn't talk about last episode, but maybe it's still relevant, so we'll
Yeah.
talk about it right now. Planet of the Apes made a lot of money selling merchandise, selling toys, selling lunchboxes, and movies didn't really do that. That wasn't like a thing. Movies were like for grown-ups, and like kids were an afterthought. But George Lucas, being the visionary he was at the time, when he agreed to make Star Wars for such a low budget, part of his contingency is that he would get first dollar profits, 100% from the merchandise sold in the movie. And the studio was like, sure,
Sure,
whatever.
why not?
Merchandise. You're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Well, fine. Yeah, here's your whole contract. You get everything you want because you're like this motherfucker thinks he's going to get paid for merchandise.
Mhm.
So George Lucas, seeing the template that was made from Planet of the Apes, went and before Star Wars came out, got toys made and merchandise and lunchboxes made because he knew that there was a market for science fiction fans who would want to buy that stuff,
Right.
and just changed the face of like film and art and media and merchandise forever.
And not just children, adults too.
Exactly, because
Right.
science fiction fans are very passionate about
Yes.
science fiction.
They want to own everything. Just
Exactly.
like I forget where I saw this, but apparently as far as like boy bands, there's also a correlation of merchandise because women will buy, statistically speaking, they will buy everything to do with something that they love
Mm.
because they're that passionate about it. So same thing with science fiction fans as well. If you were that die hard for
Yeah.
One Direction versus die hard for
Star
Star
Wars.
Wars,
Yeah.
yes, you're gonna buy every single piece of merchandise.
Think of anyone that you know who is just into Star Wars. They probably have like a Darth Vader t-shirt casually,
Yeah.
or like a lightsaber
Yeah.
toy from when they were a kid, or stuff like that. Like it's so commonplace now. But back then, this was like revolutionary. This was new. And that is the connection between George Lucas and Planet of the Apes. Is because he looked at Planet of the Apes and saw there was this like audience that wasn't being served, that
Mhm.
was buying merchandise for these movies that the studio wasn't picking up on.
Right.
But back to the production history of this movie. So Pierre Boulle wrote this draft about Taylor leading an uprising of the enslaved men to like take back control
Right.
from the guerrilla general Ursus.
Mhm.
And Ursus, who was like, I'm gonna just fight and kill all the humans, and Taylor was leading the uprising. It was like an uprising movie.
In the 5th movie, Battle of Planet of the Apes, wasn't it Odo? Odo was our introduction to the gorillas being super aggressive and for war.
So the introduction is this movie is Beneath the Planet of the Apes with the
Right.
gorilla and this. But in the 5th movie, we're introduced to Aldo.
Aldo, that's his name.
Aldo, but we'll talk about that in the next coming episodes.
Mhm.
But yeah,
But it's all relevant. It all circles back to each other.
right, it all ties together.
Yes.
Because in the first movie, the gorillas are established as like the soldiers, the cops, the military. And in this movie, it's even further established. However, Bull's script was apparently not very full of visual shock and surprise like the original movie, so they rejected it.
Mm.
They still took elements of that. They took element of Rod Serling's, and Mort Abrams. He was a producer on the movies. Wrote some story ideas, and then went to Paul Dinn, a British writer,
Mhm.
and was like, here are all the ideas. Can you develop these into a script? And right now it's going to be called Planet of the Apes Revisited. That was what they thought the sequel title was going to be. Planet of the Apes Revisited. Terrible name. Thank goodness they changed it.
That's bad.
So Den implemented his trauma of the 1945 atomic bombings and the fear of like nuclear warfare into the DNA of the script.
Mhm.
And he made that a much bigger element. And of course, the half human, half ape child came back up as another idea.
Yeah.
And they even did a makeup test of this, but it made them think too much about bestiality that they were uncomfortable with the idea of having this character in the movie.
Right. And also, like, you're tinkering on the boundary of glorifying it,
Right.
too, depending on the circumstance.
By maybe
of
saying
that
it's like an evolution of it or something.
Yeah. You don't want to platform that kind
That kind of
subject
weird
matter.
shit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, at least with Dr. Monroe
Dr.
on
Moreau.
his island, it's very, very ugly.
Yeah.
It's not glorified in any
Well, he's like a monster.
form of the
He's
word.
like torturing them.
He's like a Dr. Frankenstein level monster who is
Right.
like doing this for the sake of science and the sake of himself.
Right.
So
Yeah, and from this script that they made,
yeah,
they came to the idea that New York City was buried underground, which we see in the movie. And because of that, they said, all right, I guess we'll call the movie Beneath the Planet of the Apes, because it's New York City is underneath the Planet of the Apes. Charlton Heston was not very interested in coming back, as we talked about. And the head of the studio was adamant that he needed to be in it. Like, Charlton Heston is the movie star. He needs to be in the sequel.
Right.
And the agents and Heston's agents and Heston himself were like, no, like, I don't want to be in this. And eventually they came to agreement where he said, I'll only come back if my pay goes to charity and you kill me at the end of the movie.
That's pretty base.
So he was like, so they realized, like, all right, if we're going to have to pay him this much money, we can only have him on set for like 5 days.
Yeah.
So he's going to be in the beginning, but he has to disappear.
Which he did.
Which is what happens in the story.
With the mutant humans.
And then they bring him back for the climax. So that means that they had to come up with a new protagonist to be in the whole rest of the movie.
Introducing our 5'2" feminist, Brent.
Well, yes, Brent, which is played by
who is
James
just a
Franciscus, shorter Charlton Heston. Is the same.
And
guy.
also just like on the opposite side of the same coin.
Yeah,
like Taylor is the male chauvinist, and Brent is the gentle short king.
Well, I think a big aspect of it is that at the end of the first movie, where it shows that Taylor isn't actually like entirely this chauvinistic monster. He's the hero.
Yeah.
He just had to be the chauvinistic monster at the beginning of the story
in order to have that development.
Right.
Yeah.
So I feel like Brent portrays like what would Taylor be like at the end of the story, but at the beginning.
He picks up where he left off.
So Brent ends up coming across as like this like super handsome Giga Chad guy.
Absolutely.
Because from the beginning he's super chill and measured, as if he's already been in the story.
Yeah.
Which we're gonna get to when we start talking about the story. But they went back to the director, Franklin Schaffner, who did the first movie, but he had already an engagement to make the film Patton about General George S. Patton, another political movie about World War II. And he also had what's his name? Jerry Goldsmith, the composer from the first movie, was also working on Patton. So these two could not come back. So they went to Ted Post, who was like a director from like TV and film and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they were like, hey, come here.
Which, by the way, you mentioned his career in TV. You could definitely feel that, as the beginning of this movie is a recap.
Right.
Almost like a season 2 recap.
We're definitely going to get to that. We're definitely going to get to that because that's a big chunk of the movie.
Yeah.
But apparently they brought him on and he said that the script didn't make any sense at all. And the producers were like, hey, what don't you like? And he wrote a letter saying that the loss of a planet is a loss of all hope. So he went back to the writer of the first script, Michael Wilson, and he asked him, hey, can you make me a script that fixes this? Because I don't like this ending being so dark.
Yeah.
But the studio was like, no, budget cut. You can't afford to hire another screenwriter. So he was like, all right, well, fuck that, I guess. I guess I'm just going to have to deal with this script where I have over 50 pages of notes.
Yeah.
Spending a week rewriting it from the original Paul Den script because he just didn't like how it was structured. He thought it didn't make any sense.
Right.
Roddy McDowell unfortunately, does not return as Cornelius.
Oh no.
This is the only live action Planet of the Apes project from this original run that he is not in.
No.
Yeah.
Cornelius, I love
I
him.
know, exactly. He's
Why'd
great.
they do that to him?
Well, he was in Scotland
Oh.
directing a movie called Tam Lin.
Oh, okay.
So
You go.
they
You go, King.
recast Cornelius as David Watson.
Mm-hmm.
And Roddy McDowell does appear in the film because there are some clips from the previous film that are reused at the beginning of this film.
Right, in the season 2 recap.
Exactly. So because of that, Roddy McDowell is still credited as being Cornelius in the movie. And for the role of General Ursus, do you know who they wanted to play the evil gorilla general?
No. Who?
The big fat guy? Orson Welles.
What?
So they
oh
went
my god. Oh my god. Thank God I was sitting down.
They went to the director of Citizen Kane himself, Unicron himself, to play General Ursus.
Listeners, okay, just for context.
For context, Winter is a huge fucking nerd who loves Orson Welles.
I have a small obsession with Orson Welles. I just love him. He's so great. I could talk about him for the rest of this podcast if I want to, but I'm gonna be quiet and let you continue.
So this is the only Orson Welles cameo we're gonna have in the entire podcast.
Okay.
This one brief moment.
Okay.
No
promises.
Much like a lot of science fiction films at the time, if anyone is familiar with Jodorowsky's Dune, for some reason people wanted Orson Welles in them to play the villain.
So, don't you dare! Some reason,
this is the point in Orson Welles' career where he was way on the downswing. He was just doing commercials. He was just living opulently and drinking wine and eating cheese all the time,
like a king.
Right, like the Baron Harkonnen. And quite literally, he was supposed to play the Baron Harkonnen.
That's funny that you say that too.
But he said no because he didn't want to waste his screen time being in a mask.
Of course. Of course he's going to be posh about it.
Of course. No, what? How could you dare have me in a movie where I don't show my face?
The literal man who's directed on the radio.
Yeah, exactly. 10 years later, voiced a Transformer.
Yeah.
So ultimately the part went to James Gregory. And yeah, I mean, the film went into production as the head of the studio was being fired. But before he was fired, he suggested to Ted Post, the director, to implement the idea of the ending that this movie has to end the franchise. Because Charlton Heston said, "I don't want to be in these anymore.
Yeah.
So you better kill me at the end." So he said, not only should you kill me at the end, but you should blow up the entire fucking planet.
Do you think Orson Welles also didn't want to be the gorilla because he's just a very sweaty man? Like, that's probably a very uncomfortable place for a large, sweaty man to be in.
There's a scene where the gorilla goes into the sauna. And
oh my god, I wrote gorillas in sauna.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that very soon, actually, because basically this is the ending of the production history. Because as the president of Fox was being fired, the one last thing that he had Post do in the script is make sure the movie ends with the doomsday bomb at blowing up the planet and effectively ending the franchise.
Yeah.
However, before the film came out, and as we know today, some producers had an idea for what possible sequels could be. And we'll talk about those in the coming weeks.
Yes.
But for now, let's talk a little bit about Beneath the Planet of the Apes, the 1970s film.
Beginning with the first movie recap.
Which I think
You've done it!
The opening of this movie is kind of cold as hell. It's kind of sick.
Yeah.
With the ocean and like no music at all. And like
it's just ambiance.
They're like reading a scroll about the Beast Man.
And also, I'm going to get into this. Please, listeners, stay tuned if you want to hear me slowly descend into timeline madness, because I'll be talking about this a lot. Basically, it's so fascinating to see how we actively get to be a part of the history being written.
Right.
This is literal proof of these laws are being put in action, but we as an audience, get to be a part of the story in that sense. Does that make sense? Like, it feels
Right.
like we're making history just by
It
making simian history
it
by watching these movies.
it has a very like cold and cinematic uh, uh atmosphere to it.
Yes.
Like it's treating the ending of the previous movie very, very seriously.
Yes.
It shows us Cornelius talking to Taylor as he rides off on the horse and all that. It's shot in almost like a very like I I, I don't I don't want to compare it directly too much to it, but like almost in like a French New Wave kind of like artsy way of like the water rolling in, just like you were saying about the metaphor of like time moves on, the waves continue to roll in.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it specifically heard what you said in the last episode
Mm-hmm.
and was implementing it to the beginning of this
Yeah.
movie. It has an eerie feeling, and it focuses on the scenes of the previous movie specifically that talk about the Forbidden Zone,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what this movie is going to delve into a lot.
The Forbidden Zone was once a paradise. Your breed made a desert of it.
Right. Which is like, this is the scroll that is being read over these images. And while this is being read over Taylor and Nova, very like picturesquely riding their horses into these like beautiful landscapes, we cut back to a new astronaut is introduced, and he is extremely handsome. That's the note I wrote. That's the note I wrote. He is extremely handsome. His partner realizes that everyone he knows is dead and then dies from the sadness like fucking Padme Amidala.
But he also crash lands with his injured crewmate Skipper.
Right, that's what I was writing here.
Yeah.
So his crewmate Skipper
Yes.
dies from sadness.
Literally, like from a broken heart.
Yeah, so he dies from a broken heart, but before dying from a broken heart, he's been blinded by the crash.
Yeah, it's
Like-
also 3955 AD, just
Right.
to set the scene.
That's the 2,000 year hence future from the previous movie.
Yes.
So these two astronauts, the way they're being like shoehorned into the story is that we need a new protagonist. So let's come up with the idea that there was another spaceship right behind Taylor's spaceship that was following him. And that's these two guys.
And he also holds a first aid kit, Brent. And he
Right.
also has this very nurturing way about him. So that led me to assume that perhaps he was a medic, perhaps he was an emergency vehicle
Right.
that was following the first ship. And honestly, considering the circumstances of what you were saying before, how these characters were shoehorned into it, this is one of the few ways I can see it smoothly occurring. Where now you introduce these two characters who, yeah, obviously they wouldn't be in the same ship as these people who are supposed to repopulate the Earth
Right.
or repopulate the planet. Because what if an emergency happens?
And I like how quickly they're just like, yeah, and everyone else on the crew is dead except the guy who looks exactly like Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
And we cut back and forth between this stuff. So we cut back to Taylor and Nova, who are like riding the horse, and he's trying to teach her how to talk. So he's doing the thing you were saying
Nova.
last time. Nova.
Me, Tarzan, you, Jane.
Yeah. So he's talking to her like the same way I talk to my dog Toby when I
Yes.
want him to say my name.
Toby.
I'm like, Toby. And he goes, yes, Daniel.
Yes,
What is it?
Daniel.
And I go, good, you're learning so fast because my dog can talk.
Mhm.
And we see as they're venturing towards like
Well,
towards
Nova
like a,
appears in the distance, in the mountain,
with Taylor.
with Brent.
No, but we cut back and forth between Taylor and
Oh,
Brent.
the montage is still happening. Okay, he's still interlacing it in there.
Right, like it's cross cut for
Yeah.
like we're cross cutting between Taylor and Nova finding the Forbidden Zone
Right.
in like these weird trippy like special effect sequences.
They also are simultaneously like flashbacks. They're used as like fragments of memory.
Right.
And that is soon realized as Nova appears in the distance on a mountain,
Right.
spotting the ship while on horseback. And there's a flashback to Taylor teaching Nova how to speak.
Right.
And then it's insinuated that Nova being on horseback on the mountain is in real time, and her Taylor teaching her
Is her
the
memories.
flashback.
Right. And I think it's cool.
And yeah, the fragments of memory, it goes to show that she is developing.
And
She is realizing and recognizing voices and faces.
yes.
Yeah.
And Nova actually plays like a pretty interesting part in this movie.
Mhm.
Doesn't do much,
Considering.
unfortunately. Like, a lot of female characters in these old movies, unfortunately, don't get much to do.
Yeah.
But
But no dialogue, so that's a nice breezy part though. You don't gotta remember much.
Thank goodness this woman doesn't have to speak. I know, right?
Oh my god.
Yeah. It is what it is. I mean, she's a great character, but maybe not like the deepest, most three-dimensional character, unfortunately.
But then there's a sudden wall of flames with the electric storm.
Yes. So I have that written here too.
Yeah.
There's a series of cool effects.
Mm-hmm.
There's a canyon effect where they do
tectonic plate.
Yes,
Where
they separate and it's a matte.
Yeah.
It's like matte painting over it, and it looks really, really cool. However, the wall of fire and the lightning are maybe a little bit less pristine.
I was like, what? Wall of fire?
Yeah. There's a big wall of fire as they try to go into.
What is that supposed to be? Okay.
And just like hand-drawn lightning appearing, and
which the hand-drawn lightning I can respect.
It's not particularly great.
I can respect it,
but yeah.
But the wall of fire, man.
It's a poignant like metaphor. Like if this was in a book and they said a wall of fire appeared,
yeah,
like it's very biblical. It's very like it's evocative of that, but in execution, because of the limited technology they had at the time, it looks so funny. It looks silly.
I honestly wish that they showed. I could have seen it in a more of a reverse shot kind of way, where we see Taylor's reaction to the wall of fire, and he's just like blazed in orange light.
Right.
That would give the illusion that he is seeing the fire. But if we were to turn the other way and the fire wasn't there, then it would be revealed too early on that the entire thing's an illusion by the mutant humans.
Right. Which they make a point because Taylor looks back at Nova and he keeps saying like, "Hey, you're seeing this too." Like he sees she's reacting to it.
Yeah.
So he knows that like whatever this illusion is, she can see it.
It's mutual illusion.
So after that, there's a bit where Taylor, after recognizing that Nova can also see this illusion, he starts to see through it and sees that there's something in the rocks that he can walk to. And he walks up to it and they do this like David Lynch ass transition as he like dives into the rocks in this poorly cut out like mat. And he just vanishes. He's gone. He's gone.
Straight up falls forward into the abyss.
Yeah, he's in the Black Lodge. He's in the Red Room now, hanging out with Laura Palmer.
But what's funny is he goes to punch the cliff.
Yeah, he goes to punch it.
Like, what is that gonna do?
I don't know.
It's with the back of his gun, and then he fades into the cliff.
And like he just like disappears behind the mat line.
But then we cut to Brent getting on the horse with Nova and insists she takes him to Taylor.
So,
because they see the dog tag.
Yeah, he sees her dog tag and sees that, oh, Taylor, take me to him.
Yes.
However, Taylor told her to go find Zero.
Right.
So she's going back to Ape City.
Yeah.
So when Brent hops on, he's like, she's taking me to Taylor. This is awesome. And she's just going to Ape City because she's like, who the fuck is this white boy?
Yeah.
But they get to the Planet of the Apes. They get to Ape City. And I wrote here that the new guy sees the Planet of the Apes and he fucking loses it. Because Brent gets there and he sees the city of apes and he just starts like freaking out.
Well, he's going through the process of being exposed to the simian society, which we got to see Taylor go through too, but just in a different way, in like a more violent way.
Right.
But he's more like a fly on the wall.
He is basically watching the first movie sped up.
Yeah.
He's watching Planet of the Apes in 2 times speed.
And on top of that, at the time that Nova brings Brent over to the simian society, there's a city council meeting occurring where it reintroduces the characters and they basically sentence for sentence discuss the plot.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this also kind of gives us our first look at some of the cheaper special effects, like compared to the first movie. As you can see in the audience, many of the extras and stuff are just wearing masks. Yeah. They're not in makeup. They're just like in floppy rubber masks. Well, if they're not having close-ups,
then it doesn't really matter.
Right. But this is where I started to really notice the budget cuts. Where like they were taking shortcuts with the makeup.
Brent is then grazed by the bullet.
Well, I'm actually I still have something written here because
in vain.
So
in vain.
Yes, there's a lot. Yes, yeah. There's a lot of talk here in this assembly, this town hall meeting, where there's chimps and orangutans and there's gorillas. And the gorillas are all being riled up because the general.
Just as a side note, it's a group of 3 again.
Right.
Just a thought.
But he's just doing a Nixon impression.
Yeah.
Like he's like, oh, invade, rah, rah, rah.
Citizen Kane moment.
But
Sorry.
it's extremely Nixon. It's Richard Nixon to a T, and it's so funny because it's transparently Nixon. It's so obviously he's basically impersonating him, and they're chanting invade, invade, like invade Vietnam, invade Vietnam.
Or is it invade or is it in vain?
It's invade.
Oh, I heard in vain. I was like, huh.
So he's riling up the people.
He's getting
the religious
excited.
people, the conservative people, the soldiers, the military,
and the scientists,
and even some of the scientists. Not all of them.
Not Zero.
Not Zero.
Cornelius gets mad at Zero for not standing up.
But he's riling up everyone on the idea of invading these primitive people who are going to rise against us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's very on the nose. Very early on, they're introducing some like transparently political like speeches, which I think is cool. But it's also maybe not as nuanced as the previous movie, but it's wearing it on its sleeve in an interesting way, in a slightly less masterfully written way. But like, I think it's interesting. Yeah. I think it's funny seeing an ape doing a Nixon impression.
Absolutely.
That's pretty funny. And yes, like you said, they get spotted, Nova and Brent.
And Brent gets grazed by the bullet.
Yeah, he gets grazed by a bullet, and I wrote here that they're escaping police brutality because the ape who shoots him has a revolver, like a cop would have, and has a billy club, and he's wearing like a British police hat
because he's like a security.
He's a cop.
Enforcement. Yeah.
And I think that's very intentional, especially when the other ones look like soldiers.
Well, the council is occurring.
Right.
So they have to have some sort of reinforcements.
Instead of giving him the same rifle as everyone else, they give him like the type of revolver that cops would have had back then.
Right.
Like it's very much trying to be like, is this police brutality? Like I think that's what
they do.
Well, they mention it later. I have it here in bold. They mention it later. Well, we'll get to there when we get there because I have it right there.
The peaceful science protesters. Yeah.
So we immediately cut to Zira marching into her house, ranting about how much she hates gorillas and how they're inferior race to hers.
Yeah.
And I just wrote, Zira is fucking racist, yo.
But don't blame her. She's a scientist.
Yeah, a racist scientist. And even Cornelius is like, dude, don't talk like that, dude. You're just like, someone's gonna hear you. And I'm like, this is great. This is so
We're
insane.
being completely satirical.
This is bad shit. This is bad shit. But this, while they're in the house, they get interrupted by Nova and Brent who show up.
Yes.
And they think Brent is Taylor, much like everyone else, because he's
shrunk like 3 feet.
But all humans look the same. So, so when Brent is introduced to Zira, he kind of recaps like the premise of the previous movie.
Basically,
he's like, "Yeah, ape society is happening, and you guys are hunting humans like animals." Blah blah blah. And it's almost like he has seen the previous movie and he's finally caught up.
Yeah. It's also like force feeding the audience who hasn't seen the first movie at the same time.
In a way, it's like catching up those two people.
Yeah.
But it's also, like you said earlier, it's retreading so much of the same ground.
Right.
To this
point.
But
it's just reinforcing it.
Right. So in this moment, they come to the conclusion that they need to dress up Brent as Taylor and send him off to be hunted by gorillas. That's what I have written here.
What? Really?
Like they put him in the same loincloth that Taylor had in the previous movie, send him off to be hunted. And I said, further making this new blonde guy into the same blonde guy as the last film.
I thought that they were just trying to disguise him as a typical human and tell him not to talk. Like that kind of thing.
Yeah. They're like, don't
but
talk.
Also, don't forget about how Dr. Zaius comes in.
Yeah.
Because he's angry at Zira. And Zira holds up the bloody towel from treating Brent's wounds. And she says that Cornelius hit her. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I just got done beating her for the way she acted.
Yeah, she was talking in public, so I slapped the shit out of her.
And Dr. Zaius is like, I'd do the same.
Makes sense. Every man should. That's his kind of reaction. And I think this is meant to be like commentary. But it is kind of funny that at the time they viewed this as like, this is commentary, but also realistic to like what a man would be doing as an excuse.
Which, speaking of men, I made a Taylor and Brent Venn diagram
Oh, perfect.
comparing the two of them.
They wear the same outfit.
I don't know if it offers anything different as to what we've already said, but I said Taylor is the male chauvinist Giga Chad who's horny and a realist, and Brent is the critical thinker, sentimental, gentle Giga feminist.
Nice. I guess as giga feminist as he could be for someone from that era.
Well, I mean, if you think about Taylor, his first approach to seeing Nova
Yeah.
as a mute human, his
He's
initial
respectful.
response. No, Taylor's wasn't.
Oh, I thought you said Brent. Sorry.
Taylor's wasn't. Taylor was like, oh, I can rule these people.
Yeah.
I can rule these people. I can be the Atom. I can be the Marco Polo. I can be the first person here. Right? And Brent is the person who, when Nova approaches his ship, he has this like gentle way of talking to her, almost like he's talking to a child.
Right.
Like he's like, I just need, where is Taylor? Like I just need to know where Taylor is. And I feel like they are very polarizing. And to see them, a little spoiler alert, a little later on in the movie, they're gonna get thrown into a Thunderdome by the mutant humans.
Mhm.
It's interesting to see the two sides of male humanity
Yeah.
go at
And also
each other.
just how much they're the same guy.
Absolutely.
They're the same guy.
Also, apes in a sauna, Daniel?
Oh, yes. So I have right here, I said we cut to naked apes. Fuck yeah.
I wrote apes in a sauna, ? That wet makeup must be so uncomfy.
It's also in the previous movie, we didn't see apes with their shirts off. So this is the first time we see like
really selling that high quality SFX.
I actually think it looks really good in this moment.
Absolutely.
Is that they're all in like these full body fursuits that are, they have like the way the hair is lying does look realistic compared to like how apes would have their hair lie on their chest and stuff like that.
But also, if you think societal wise and cultural wise, who goes in a sauna if you're a human?
People who just like worked out or whatever.
People who want to
or wealthy
look, people who want to look a certain way, people who are very body conscious. They have their own body goals. Simian society has body goals.
Hell yeah.
They have diets, they have exercise, they have things like that. They are well established in self-image. I think this is approaching like a whole new level of like the social
just how
atmosphere.
much they're like us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, ladies, you might not like it, but this is the ideal male body type.
Oh my god.
This big
It's
old
a wet chimp.
wet gorilla, wet orangutan.
Hairy.
I got that. I'm rocking the wet orangutan.
Hey,
look.
why are you talking to ladies? They're right here.
Windsor.
Who are you talking to?
Windsor, look, I've got the wet orangutan look going on. I'm hairy,
well aware.
I'm drenched.
I am well aware, Daniel.
But yeah, I love that scene. It's so funny. It's about them conspiring to be like the military and like religious leaders, like shaking hands in the sauna behind the scenes.
Yes.
They're basically like bumping butts together.
Love it. And then Cornelius, as far as after Dr. Zaius leaves, Cornelius explains to Brent how if he comes across a gorilla and speaks, he'll be dissected.
Right.
And this is the introduction to Brent that they're doing medical procedures.
Right.
That this society of apes, gorillas, and chimps are medically advanced enough to use science as a punishment for disobeying.
Right. And he realizes the sheer danger of it all.
Correct. Like
So-
there's a stakes.
So when they dress them up in these like loincloths and shove them in like a truck, they're like, yeah, go in this truck. They're going to take you over to where the gorillas train and then just fucking escape from there. That's like the plan. That's all they have.
And then once they get there, they're
So-
able to get a horse.
Well, that's the thing is when we see how the gorillas train with the humans.
Oh, that's right. The montage. Yeah.
We see that the gorillas round up humans and they put them on horses and they just knock the shit out of them. They just like hit them in the head with bats. They shoot at them for target practice. They do all this crazy shit.
They also whip them.
They whip them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're using them like they're dummies. And Zira loads them into the back of the truck.
But
and,
double locks it.
and she
quotation
double
marks.
locks it. Yeah, I have that written here. Zira double locks the door. Parentheses. What the fuck? What the fuck?
Which, by the way, the guy who the ape
The ape?
who is controlling it is like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
like
makes sense. Yeah.
totally makes sense.
She's like, wait, I gotta double lock the door. And then she unlocks the door and winks at Brett. And I'm like, what do you mean double lock the door? That's not a thing. That's not a thing. And yeah, this eventually leads to like
the chase.
the carriage is going off the road, almost like a stagecoach style fight, as Brent sneaks out the back unlocked door and just fist fights the gorilla on the roof of the cage of the stagecoach. And I wrote here that all with no music. There is some like genuine impressive stunt work going on here.
Yes.
Obviously,
which music would be too distracting.
There's some clear like rear projection, like where they just project the background on guys being like, oh.
Yeah.
But there's some shots that are like obviously real, that include like real guys on top of a moving carriage fighting one another. That I think looks fun to film. Like that looks so fun. I would have loved to film something like that. But it was a really like cool fight scene, I thought. And as soon as the fight scene ends and they get on the horse, there were apparently like 20 gorillas that were in the trees watching.
Yep.
Hiding in a hole.
And they're just released from the trees.
And they all just chase them on the horses.
Yeah. And Brett and Nova, they eventually ditch the horses, escaping the apes.
Right.
But they go downward, and it's revealed to be the Queensboro Plaza.
Right. So while running away from like fucking 20 apes, full speed, chasing after them like Mad Max, they just find a hole.
Oh, you want to talk about Mad Max? Wait until the fifth movie.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. But they're chased, and then they get off the horses, and they see a hole in the side of a cliff. And when they go into the hole in the side of the cliff, they finally venture beneath the Planet of the Apes. 40 minutes into the movie.
We're finally there.
We're at the 40-minute mark. Almost halfway through the movie.
We finally lived up to the title.
They let us wait. Kind of like the first movie. Let us wait like 30 minutes before giving us the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
This one, and maybe not as succinctly of a way, makes us wait 40 minutes to see Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Which is pretty cool in my book. I think it's okay.
There's also the reveal, because Brent sees the Queensboro Plaza, but it's almost as if that doesn't convince him enough.
Right. Well,
so then he sees the New York Summer Festival poster, and he then realizes that it's Earth.
And he says, "Oh my God, did we finally do it?" That's his version of it.
My God, did we finally do it?
Yeah. And it's so obvious that the cave that they're in is made out of like that spray foam stuff that's been painted with Mod Podge.
And it's so interesting to hear, like, the collective we is such a universal aspect to realizing what the race had done to the planet.
It's that subliminal, mutually assured destruction fear.
Yes.
That was like all over at the time.
Yeah.
And this cave is cool looking because it has like real tile work you'd see.
Yeah,
it
reminds me of the subway.
Right, it's keeping in line with like that New York subway look, but then the actual rocks are just made out of foam, like the spray insulation foam that you spray on like an AC, which is so funny because like as he's touching the rocks, they're wiggling as he's touching it, and I'm like, this is so funny. But I think it's still a very cool scene. And then we cut from "My God, did we finally do it?"
to Dr. Zayas.
Chimpanzee hippies! Exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point, question mark. And they're chanting, "Stop the guns, stop the war. We want freedom, we want peace." Marching in a circle like Vietnam protesters, like hippies, which is like as if it couldn't be more on the nose. Like it's really going for that like anti-war, anti-Vietnam era stuff, that don't trust anyone over 30, that whole thing. Not as, again, not as like nuanced or succinctly as the previous movie, but louder, in a very loud, overt way, more satirical way, I think, because it's so direct. And Richard Nixon gorilla shows up, and he sends his gorillas to beat the shit out of and arrest all the chimps.
Well, the protesters, they're put in cages like the humans.
Yeah.
And they're screaming shouting about brutality.
They're saying gorilla brutality.
Yeah.
Gorilla brutality.
Which we were talking about earlier, how that one gorilla that grazed had a graze
is
bullet
meant to be a cop.
for Brent is meant to be police brutality.
Right. So and they say it out loud. They say
Right.
guerrilla brutality.
They state
right.
it, yeah.
Like as if you missed it before. And they're gonna kill all the chimps.
Yeah.
But Dr. Zaya shows up and
But
he
ape
says,
does not kill ape.
well, he says, don't do it because we'll only make martyrs out of them. That's the only reason they don't kill them.
But what about the ape law?
They don't even mention it. They probably forgot.
The audacity, Ted Post. How dare you?
Well, also, I wrote a funny note here. Obviously, this film came out in 1970. Has nothing to do with Donald Trump or 2016 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of funny that the leader is like a charismatic orange man.
Anyway, Brent and Nova bunker down in the subway plaza,
Yeah.
and Brent contemplates how we got here
Brent
as a collective.
and well, they find a water fountain.
Yes.
And of course, he drinks from it immediately.
Well, oh wait, hold on. He that's a little far ahead because Brent checks outside to see the ape troops right outside the subway.
Right.
So then
they venture deeper.
He
into
wakes
the
up Nova, and they follow a humming sound.
Yes.
Which
like
is
a vibration.
The electromagnetic sound waves.
Telekinetic magic.
Science. And Brett and Nova climb further, coming across the remnants of New York infrastructure, and the humming stops.
Well, there's a lot of really cool images of them walking through what is clearly just like outside, but they matte painted in a bunch of like ruins of like Radio City and like the New York Public Library and all these like really cool places.
Which it almost looks like Kong's Middle Earth.
Kong? Oh, like Skull Island.
Island,
yeah. It kind of has that effect. Yeah, I think so too. And it almost...
It's approaching the innermost cave.
Yes. Hollow Earth.
My film professor would be so happy to hear me say that.
But yeah,
shout out to Professor Dodemo. I'm gonna tell him to listen to this.
Eventually, yes. When they get to the New York Public Library, there's a water fountain outside where the humming stops and the water fountain turns on. And Brent is like, fuck it, water. Starts drinking it. Very dirty looking water. It's clean enough for him, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But while drinking it drives him mad. So he grabs Nova while she's drinking from it and tries to drown her in it.
But
it's humming.
Is it driving him mad or is it telling him to do something?
I think it's telling him to do something.
Yeah.
So he walks into the library, leaving her out there.
Mm-hmm.
And he finds a human who is praying.
Well, he accidentally backs up into the door at that open.
Yes, because he's scared of what he did, right?
Yeah, he's like in shock and he's like, no. He's like looking at his hands, having one of those moments of like, did I really just do that?
Right.
And he leans up against the door thinking it's just a wall. But the door opens and there's a mutant human in a cloak.
Just a human so far. We don't know.
Well, there's an oddly dressed human.
Yes.
Who is very space dressed, alien-like dressed.
Praying at an altar.
Praying at an altar that has a bomb.
Yes, an upside down cross.
Yeah.
And a nuke.
Mm-hmm. Which is very Metropolis, by the way. It's so Metropolis.
It's insane looking. And the upside down cross thing kind of took me by surprise for an old movie like this.
For me too. I was like, clutching my pearls.
Like, yeah, it also predates that whole satanic panic movement of the 80s too.
Because satanic panic was in the late 70s. Well, it wasn't just the 80s.
But it comprised that like Reagan era.
It came at the time of
religious conservative,
like heavy metal.
Yeah.
And rock and roll.
Like the Dungeons and Dragons and Black Sabbath and all those bands and the
even
nerd
Kiss.
stuff. Yeah. But that stuff really hit its peak in like the 80s.
Yeah.
So in this point, it's just these science fiction writers just being they're being controversial. They're being like outsider artists who are trying to provoke images that are horrifying.
Do you think that it's meant to provoke, or is it meant to be the polarizing side symbolically to the simians, which the simians are worshiping this deity who has all the answers. They've written the laws. They control science and they control religion. It's all intertwined into one. It's very of the Catholic Christianity. Like it's very of that
Yeah.
world. Meanwhile, we're getting introduced to these new characters, this new society
Right.
where they essentially worship the Antichrist.
Right. They worship the literal means of destruction of the planet.
Literally.
Yes, and it's like it's depicted as if it is the devil because the upside down cross.
Absolutely.
But that it's such like nowadays it's so quaint to think of that. Like, oh yes, your villain's the Antichrist.
Well,
Nowadays,
now everyone wants to side with the Antichrist. I think
Right.
the
But, like,
the
nowadays,
sides have flopped.
the whole thing is like nowadays the biblical allegory stuff is so like played out.
Yeah.
But back then, this is like truly shocking
Oh
to
yeah,
go into
absolutely.
it. Even now, seeing some of the images we get later in the movie that I have written down here, there's some truly like heavy metal looking shit later in this movie.
Absolutely.
And this is like the first glimpse we have into it. That like the first human we meet is praying to an upside down cross
Mhm.
and a nuke that has Alpha and Omega etched onto it. Alpha and Omega is the thing
The doomsday.
that God and Jesus refer. I am the beginning and the end.
Right.
The Alpha and the Omega. The nuke,
2012.
right? The nuke being the creator
Mhm.
and the thing to end the world.
Yeah.
Because the Big Bang and the Big Bang.
Right. Literally speaking.
So this human turns around and beeps. He goes "Bing," like a ping sound.
If there's a
effect.
little chime, yeah.
Yeah, and Brent can understand him telepathically. Like he's just
I
talking
thought
straight.
that was so funny. I'm sorry. I was really trying to like listen and pay attention, but the fact that he like did a harsh blink and with the chime, I was like, oh my god, I couldn't stop giggling.
Yeah,
It was so funny.
At first, I couldn't follow what was happening, but I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of Godzilla X Kong just came out.
Yeah.
And in that, the humans that live underground communicate
They only speak.
telepathically.
Yeah, they speak to each other like brain to brain.
Right. They ping each other. It's cool.
Literal pinging.
Yeah. Well, on this, they're literally pinging.
Yeah.
But this guy takes them to a trial in front of like the elders of these human
And they're all
beings.
wearing different colored vests, speaking in different tone chimes.
I love this scene.
I love it so much. It's so cool.
This scene is like really intense.
Yeah.
I think the way this is edited with the pings and all the images cutting back and forth and the way that they're doing this trial to interrogate Brent, I think this scene is like probably the best scene in the movie.
Mhm.
It's so well edited. It like I mentioned David Lynch before, but this feels like if David Lynch had an interrogation scene, like it would go like this.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like
Yeah, absolutely.
it's so cool. And like we as the audience are understanding what these pings mean through Brent's reactions and responses to them.
Yes.
And this feels like what the movie was really supposed to be.
Mhm.
Like everything up to this point was like, well, I have to do that to set the stage. And this is
I have
like
to do this. I have to do that. Yeah. Just to get it
and
out of the way.
in the name of like there's a podcast that one of my former film professors hosts
Mhm.
called Eye of the Duck.
Mhm.
And it's about this idea that David Lynch posed that you know you can look at a duck, you can look at its feathers, its wings, its tail, its beak,
Mhm.
but to really get to know a duck, you have to look at its eye.
Mhm.
It's like the part of the duck you're looking, you're seeing the soul of it.
Mhm.
And a movie is like that. You can look at a movie, you can look at the cinematography, you can look at all these other aspects of it, but there's something in that movie that is like what the filmmaker or the artist was really like. That's the part he really wanted to itch.
Mhm.
And for me, I think that this is
This
that.
is the eye of the
This is
duck.
the eye of the duck for me. Like what I think. This is the part of the movie where I like fully locked in.
Hmm.
Where I was like, all right, this movie is gonna be cool. And from this point on, I loved the rest of the movie.
Mhm.
Up until this point, I was like, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
I was into it. Like I thought it was really fun, but like I was more mixed, not as enthusiastic as the first one.
As I mentioned in my last rating of the first movie in our first episode, I had given the rating because I hadn't seen the rest of the films yet. I didn't
Mhm.
want to start off too high or too low, so I started in the middle. But as I went on, I started to lose a focus on the astronauts
Right.
aspect of it, like the discovery of humans from the past coming to the future and seeing them. Even though I appreciate everything that is like timeline wise with Easter eggs and stuff, but genuinely, I am losing my thought.
Well, I think what you're trying to get at is that because this storyline only goes for these 2 movies,
Yeah.
you started to get more into the aspect of the next 3 movies,
Which
which
is
were
thoroughly
about
explored.
apes. Right.
Yeah.
Which that was
That's
the
just what
stuff
I
that
think.
was itching you more.
Really, my my experience watching these movies started with the 3rd movie.
Right.
Like that's the best way I could put it.
Because the 3rd movie does, in a sense, like reboot this original franchise.
Yeah.
Like it feels like these 2 movies. We'll get to this when we get closer to the end of the movie, but it feels like the first 2 movies are like this one epic of the Planet of the Apes, and the next 3 movies are like the next chapter, like the next reboot of this franchise.
Right.
And I'll talk about that more when we get to the end of this or we get to the next movie. But this, yes, that I agree with you. I understand where you're coming from.
But also what I think is really interesting as well, one of the cool aspects of it is Brent was overwhelmed by the chiming all at once.
Right.
And this became like psychological warfare.
Yes.
And this mutant human species,
Right.
due to the bomb, which by the way already happened. The bomb is in the past, but they still
Well, there was
have
a
another
nuclear
one.
war, but now these humans have migrated underground and evolved over the years
Because of the levels of
Radiation.
radiation and radioactive. So, and
Like
that's explored in
ghouls
the
from
5th
Fallout.
movie. Yes. They view the atomic bomb as a holy weapon of peace.
Right. I have that written here too. Weapons of peace, which I think is.
Meanwhile, using psychological warfare, saying
Yes.
that it's peaceful.
I think weapons of peace is a very poignant metaphor.
Traumatic weapons of illusions and peace.
Right. They use chromatic hypnosis
Yeah.
to make them see visions outside. They use visual, and I wrote the thing that the what's it called? The language they use is chromatic hypnosis, visual and sonic deterrents that make you imagine your own peace.
And another funny thing too is because Brent had no useful information, they mind control him to choke Nova.
Right.
And essentially their
to
method,
assault her. He's like they're
Yeah.
trying to get him to sexually assault her, which is like kind of intense.
Their method,
I mean, it is intense.
yeah, their method of approaching quotation marks enemies
Right.
is forcing their enemies to
do-
destroy each other
Right. So they
instead of doing it themselves, which therefore they can't take any credit for because they're peaceful people.
Yes. So they keep saying like, no, we're peaceful. We would never kill you. We would never do our own violence.
We'll make you do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's I think it's extremely like evocative.
Now,
Like,
can I just throw in a little side note?
yeah, what's that?
So, as far as treating enemies, being a peaceful person or being of a peaceful people and not taking credit for the damage that they do to themselves,
Mhm.
it kind of sounds like Big Pharma, just a little bit.
Yeah, it sounds like these establishment things that are profiting off of war, that are profiting off of
Yeah.
people being harmed.
Right.
Like for example, in Big Pharma, like in like the opioid epidemic,
Yes.
where they're essentially making millions and millions of dollars selling people heroin,
Mhm.
selling the heroin as pills,
Yeah.
just to take while they're home to like pass the pain or whatever.
Yeah.
And people are dying in
Mhm.
mass over this stuff. And it's just it's this huge crisis. And that came years later, but even at this time, like war, like profiteering off of like Vietnam,
Mhm.
or like the ideologies of this, like using ideology of like the greater good, of doing it for peace.
Treating people as if they're just pawns
Numbers
in your game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just throwing bodies at it. And nowadays we have horrible atrocities happening overseas with the Israel-Palestine stuff, with Ukraine and Russia,
Mhm.
stuff like that, where it's people are being treated like numbers and just throwing bodies at war, because rather than care about the lives and the peace of the people,
Mhm.
it's easier to just throw more bodies at it.
There's also a priority of the sanctity of the culture
Yeah.
and the society
In the name of
the
peace.
greater good, in the name
Yes,
of
in the
peace.
name of peace. In the name of
that is more
our-
important
yeah.
than you
Exactly.
as an individual.
That's like what they're trying to justify it this.
Right, exactly.
It's justified to do a genocide if,
which
like,
then excuses their mind control.
yeah, if we're the good guys, it's fine if we do it.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. So I feel like that is where I was like locking in on this movie. And this scene where Brent is like being forced to assault Nova
Mhm.
was like kind of upsetting to
It was
watch. I
upsetting.
imagine you found it upsetting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Brent is clearly very like tortured by doing this. Like it's not like it's this scene where like James Bond is slapping a woman or whatever. Like it's clear that Brent is like
Or even
being
like
tortured.
yeah, I would definitely, cuz seeing there's definitely a standard set as to what you're going to see here as far as the way that humans are going to be treated like cattle
Mhm.
or just individuals in general are going to be treated. Um seeing humans get whipped and that forceful imagery
Right.
has already set the standard as to how cruel
Ape society.
this
Yeah.
just in general this planet is.
Right. And also it goes to show that like finding these humans and all that stuff, the humans are just as evil, if not more. Like
Yeah.
it's still like this pervasive evil still
Right.
exists. They're not treating this guy who they found as an equal. They're treating him the same way the apes were treating him.
Yeah.
Like it goes to show that there is no difference. Like
No.
like there is no difference.
Doesn't matter who's doing it, it's the things that are being done.
Right. It's the prejudice is the evil in us all or whatever. Like the stuff that Rod
Which is
Serling said.
definitely along
Like,
the lines of the moral that I chose for this movie.
The core of all evil comes down to the same thing. Is
Yes.
what Rod Serling was trying to say.
Which, speaking of which, the cruel of it, all evil, the apes are determined. They begin to go into
March
the
to
Forbidden Zone,
Right. I have that here
and
too.
they have the wall of fire,
So-
and their deity starts to cry blood.
So yes. So we cut from the scene, the trial scene with Brent and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Straight to the gorillas marching on the Forbidden Zone. And maybe the most heavy metal, Vlad the Impaler fucking bullshit happens. Like insane looking shit. Like it looks like the cover of a metal album.
It does.
Hundreds of gorillas upside down, like crucified on upside down crosses,
Mhm.
on fire with a massive wall of flames like it's in hell.
Yeah.
And a giant statue of the lawgiver that bleeds.
Mhm.
Right? He's crying blood. His hands are bleeding.
living.
He's bleeding.
He's bleeding. Yeah.
And the gorillas start breaking down. Their minds start to break down.
Yeah.
They start to completely like, oh my God, that is my God is bleeding. How could a God bleed?
And not only is he bleeding, but he's crying. What does he think of us? Like
Right.
it starts to allow those questions. Like, are we doing the right thing?
The mutants are using this chromatic hypnosis, very peaceful form of warfare, to
Quotation marks.
fucking torture and break the spirits of their enemies.
Which is also crazy that in the 5th movie, the statue of Seizure also cries.
Yes, in the final shot.
Yes, in the final shot.
Stop talking about the 5th movie.
Sorry,
Save
I'm
that for
obsessed with the 5th movie.
Really? Okay, we'll get to okay. we'll definitely get to that
because
episode.
there's so much that comes full circle in that movie.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's my favorite one. I'm saying that there's just so much to talk about.
Right. This is
Yeah.
the last one we both saw too, because it's the last one in
It's true.
order.
This much is
But-
true.
Yeah, this scene is insane. And the only way they're able to break this illusion
Yeah.
is that Dr. Zaius, in his blind faith, because he can't, it doesn't make sense to him.
It proves
He's
it
like,
isn't
that
real.
can't be real. If that's real, I'll march into that fire and I'll die alongside my God.
Yeah.
And this blind faith of him allows him to break the illusion because he's so blinded by his faith that he walks into the fire.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, that is the thing that reveals that the fire was not real the whole time.
It was an illusion.
And all it serves to do is to radicalize him and the rest of the army, seeing like, oh, our God is true.
Mhm.
Our God is not bleeding. Our God just protected our Dr. Zaius. Like
So now it's just reaffirming the exact
it made them
opposite.
stronger in their belief. Yes.
The exact opposite.
Because what does warfare do except further radicalize the victims of the people you are slaughtering?
Yeah.
So it's another, I think, metaphor for that. I think it's another like Vietnam thing.
Which, after the illusion has fallen, the skyline of the fallen New York City is revealed to the apes.
Right. They see the Forbidden Zone. They see
Yes.
the destroyed city. And we cut back to Catholic Mass
The
happening.
mutant humans.
Yeah.
And they flee to the cathedral to sing to
Well,
their
they're
savior.
having a mass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was an order for the children to be locked away and the adults to go to the cathedral.
Right.
Something of that nature, because something is about to go down.
And it's very clear, like they're all dressed in robes, like Catholic priests.
I reveal my innermost self to my God.
Yes, and in that, I reveal my innermost self to my God.
Mm-hmm.
They peel their faces off.
Which, by the way,
did you know that was going to happen?
No, special effects within special effects like that is nutty.
So I have a little bit of a story about that. That when they were making the special effects for the mutants,
mm-hmm.
they knew in the script that they needed to make mutant humans that looked like nuclear, like falling apart people.
Yeah.
But makeup is an additive thing,
yes.
right? You're adding makeup to someone's face.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the drawings and the effects and the gore and the ideas they were coming up with, they're adding too much mass to the people's faces.
Mm.
So they couldn't figure out a way that they can make a mask that you can peel off that looked realistic over a face that was already bigger than a human face.
Right.
So I think one of the makeup assistants on one of his designs was just drawing a picture of these humans with these like striped kind of scars.
Like they're poisoned.
Like they're poisoned, like the like reptilian in a way.
Yeah.
And John Chambers looked at it and he realized, like, oh, if we keep it simple and we keep them bald and like that,
mm-hmm.
we can just put a latex layer of skin color over that
mm-hmm.
and have them peel that latex away, and it would look as if they were peeling their skin away.
So the real illusion is using depth of field with the paint.
Right, like instead of like they put a makeup face on them, right? Latex face. And then they put a skin colored mask over that.
Yeah.
But the original designs had like bones protruding or had like big cheekbones or sullen eyes. But in order to make it look like someone's eyes are sunken in, you need to make their cheeks and eyebrows bigger.
Right, you need to make it look more gaunt.
So if you put a human mask over that, it would look weird and stretched out.
Yeah.
But in this way, because instead of adding all these details protruding from the faces, they just kept it mostly simple.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed them to just peel this face back, and it was all based on just a design like one of the assistants did, which is similar to the first movie. In the first movie, when they were sculpting like what the apes would look like, they couldn't find that perfect middle ground. So that same guy who was an assistant in the first movie, who was now just working in the second movie, went into his back office and was just practicing sculpting a chimp.
Mm-hmm.
And he sculpted one on a human head mannequin that was like, on a human head mannequin. So it was like halfway between a chimp and a human.
Right.
And when the supervisors from the studio came to go see what the makeup was looking like, that's the one that they saw and that they were like, perfect. That's the design.
Wow.
So that's like a lot of the stuff was being like by the seat of the pants, making up as they're going along.
Yeah. They're just figuring it out.
Yeah. And that's the cool stuff about this type of field, like this makeup and filmmaking, especially this early in cinematic history.
Mm.
But yeah. And that's my side tangent about the makeup on the humans, on the mutants.
Brent is this is the hoedown in the Thunderdome. Brent is reunited with Taylor in a locked jail cell where they are forced telepathically to try and kill each other.
Well, before that, the humans in their mass, after they peel their skin off, which we reveal like what the fallout has done to them, they do the sign of the cross upside down.
Oh yeah.
And they're praying to, like, they're really hammering in like the satanic imagery of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like before that imagery was used in much more popular culture or heavy metal. Like this is like so weirdly before that. It's so strange.
Right.
Like it's like purposely trying to shock people, I think. Before this stuff was used and like co-opted and pushed even further a decade later.
I would say, I mean, also just to touch on my point before when we last discussed this, I am really gonna drive in that it's more purposeful than just to shock.
Right.
It's to be the polarizing of the simian society where they are holier than thou.
Right.
these people are not.
But they're acting the same way.
But they perform
Yeah.
rituals in a very similar way.
They're doing the
Which is
same thing,
fascinating.
but their symbols are the opposite of each other.
Exactly.
But
But
they're the
also the
same.
simians are above and the
Mutant
mutant humans
yeah.
are below.
Right.
So really, the simian, they have like the typical standing up cross, and the mutant humans, they're in like the upside down world. They have it upside down in the below.
And both of them are metaphors for Catholics.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's so weird. It's so funny. I think it's cool. I think it's insane and metal and weird and silly, but I like it. And yes, like you said, now we see the return of Charlton Heston.
Mm-hmm. He's finally back for $1 million.
And this is where they say to him, we are peaceful people. We don't kill our enemies. We get our enemies to kill each other.
Yes.
Which is just like the definition of a proxy war. That's exactly what Vietnam was. Exactly
Basically.
what we were doing during the Cold War.
Yeah.
Having proxy wars in the Middle East, having proxy wars in Vietnam, in the name of fighting communism. Like in it's something that still continues to this day, like we were saying before, in Israel and Ukraine and stuff like that. Right. It's like fighting, like, yes, we're not technically a part of that war, but here's some money for that war. Like let's fund that war. It's just I wrote here proxy war bullshit.
And then all of a sudden, Nova speaks. She shows up out of nowhere.
Yes.
And says Taylor's name out loud, distracting the mutant who is impaled by the spiky cage.
Yes, and the fight is really intense.
Oh, it's so intense.
I think the fight is cool because it's not like choreographed. It looks like two men
roughhousing,
actually
fighting in a bar,
yeah.
kind of fighting.
And they're doing things like they're breaking the cement walls,
yeah,
and they're like smashing holes in it and stuff like that. And they kill the human mutant, like one of the human
by
mutant
trapping
councilmen.
him in the spike.
They
door.
impale him on the door.
Yeah.
But like the fight is sick because it's just two guys going at it like in a bar fight.
But then what's interesting also is as the impaled mutant dies, he's laying on the ground. He says, "I reveal my innermost self to my God," as he dies.
Yes.
And he takes his mask off. So even in death, that's revealed culturally what is the correct thing to do. Like he's about to meet his maker.
Right. And as this fight is going on and as like this whole escape and stuff is happening, I wrote this note here. A reminder that Brent was recently shot, quote, 2 days prior.
Yeah.
And Taylor was shot in the throat just a few days before that. So like in this week, both of these men have been shot.
Yeah.
And they're just jumping around and fighting.
The roundhousing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, after this little prison break sequence, what happens, Winter?
Nova, as they are running, she gets shot by some mutant humans in the hallway, and she dies in Taylor's arms.
Yep. And I think in that moment, Taylor realizes that there's no hope.
Yeah.
I think you see in his eyes because Brent is like, let's go. Let's get this bomb away from them and escape. And Taylor looks at him and he's like, I have something else in mind.
Yeah.
And while this is happening, we're cross-cutting to the guerrillas getting into the Forbidden Zone.
They're taken to the city, yeah.
Right. The guerrillas are showing up and they're just
and there's this mass panic.
Slaughtering every human they see. And it's just like a bunch of running around, a bunch of people running around Star Trek sets with guns. Like it's just
an absolute mess.
Yeah.
The apes come face to face with the bomb priest, is what I call him, because
the bomb priest.
I couldn't remember what his name was. They shoot him in an attempt to stop the launch as he tries to press the button.
Yes.
And he dies before he can.
And there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's like Brent tries to distract them by going over the piano and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
the apes pull down the bomb and it begins to smoke.
Right. They're trying to pull down the bomb because they're like, look, a weapon. Let's take it so the humans don't use it.
They want it for themselves.
Right. They don't want the humans to have it.
Yeah.
But Taylor goes over and he's like talking shit. He's like, fuck you. And like they're like, no, fuck you. So they shoot him.
He's shot in the chest.
And as he falls down, he slams his hand on the big red button on the console.
And before he does it, Brent is basically shot up firing squad.
Oh, Brent is fucking murdered. Brent
Brent is like up against a wall, like 5 guns on
no
him,
clothes on.
like mob noir style.
Yeah, they fill him with a Tommy gun.
Basically. And as Taylor falls dying, he detonates the bomb.
Yes, and we cut to white. And did you write down what's said when it cuts to white?
No, I didn't actually.
What it said is, in one of the countless billions of galaxies in the universe lies a medium-sized star, and one of its satellites, a green and insignificant planet, is now dead.
Ta-da!
The world explodes. The end. That's it. Taylor blew up Earth.
Are you ready? Now, here's the thing.
I also wrote here something I forgot during the production history.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That the sets of the Mutant Council, that room, and the Temple of the Bomb are reused sets from the film Hello, Dolly, and sets in New York and Grand Central Station, like look-alike stuff.
Huh.
So that's what those sets are.
Well,
because they're in order to save money.
Yeah. So here's my summary, but here's the thing. I was being a little sassy because I was upset with this ending.
Really?
I was not happy with this ending.
I laughed. I
laughed too.
I lost it.
So I wrote 5'2" feminist astronaut buries his crewmate after crash landing on Earth 3955 AD, while a turf war is erupting between apes on horses with guns and telepathic mutant humans who worship the atomic bomb. Don't worry, nothing will matter in the end because it blows up anyway.
Well, that's the nihilism with these movies. These movies all end nihilistically, except one of them, but we'll get there when we get there.
The moral, I thought it was creating violence in the minds of enemies is peaceful.
That's not the moral. That's funny though. That's funny.
I was like, what did I learn?
Are your
psychological warfare?
Psychological warfare is good.
The cinematic takeaway though, putting SFX under an SFX mask is considered SFXception.
That's what you wrote?
Yeah, that's what I wrote.
That's great.
6 out of 10 atomic bombs.
6 out of 10?
Yeah, I know. I put 6 out of 10. But I'll adapt it. I
mean, it's fair. You can name whatever you want.
Yeah, but here's the thing. But now that I've seen all 5 movies, I can revisit it with a more enlightened perspective. I've been taught the ways a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I gave the last one an 8. I like this one more than the first one. I'll give it 8.5.
Really?
8.5.
Fascinating.
Because I want to save the big numbers for my favorite ones.
8.5 is pretty. This is, I don't feel this way, but between this one and Battle, those two are considered the worst, like among critics and stuff like that.
Well, critically speaking, sure.
Like critically speaking,
but what about Daniel speaking?
So for me, I believe, and I'm gonna check. Yes, my letterbox score for it, because I do out of 5 stars. Mm-hmm. They don't directly translate to a number for me. Yeah. Like,
it's hard to do. It's
right.
What is that word? Numerically?
Like, in my head, I think of it as more like a grade scale. Yeah. Like for example, like a 6 out of 10 is like a D, right? So
a 7 is a C.
Right. So like I don't really, some people view like 5 as middle average and then up and down from there. Yeah. I don't think I'm a human. I don't think like that. I don't think like a calculator.
That's kind of the way I was thinking. But right. I was like, regardless of how I really feel about these movies, I enjoyed watching all of them. Right. So I'm never going to give it below a 5. Right. So none of these got below a 5 so for like, me. But it's just a matter of which one do I like more or less. Does that make sense?
A 3 out of 5 is like, okay. Like that, yeah. I'll be like, yeah, that's fine. If it comes on TV, whatever. Sure. Yeah. Like a 3.5 out of 5 is like, that's pretty good. Like I'd watch that again. Yeah. A 4 out of 5 is like, that was really good. I'll maybe show it to someone else. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5. So numerically to me, that's a 9.5 like out of 10 to me. So a 4.5 technically translates to a 9, but like, I don't know if I would give this a 9 out of 10, but like, I don't like to think like, I just think like the stars. I just put the stars because however I feel. It's vibes. I go by vibes. Vibes. And
Got it.
I go purely by vibes, Winter.
Oh, okay.
So the vibe for this one was 4.5 out of 5.
All right.
And largely that was for me the second half of the movie. The first half of the movie I was like okay with, like I wasn't super into.
Yeah, it wasn't. There wasn't anything like really standing out to me about it. It just felt like a lot of epilogue up to the pinnacle of meeting the mutant humans.
I think the first half was very well directed. It's very like it was very engaging, even though
I'm not saying it was lackluster or
Right.
anything like that. I'm just saying that this definitely the pinnacle of the movie was the mutant humans,
absolutely.
and they had to figure out a way to get there while also laying the foundation of the previous movie.
That's yes, I agree.
Meanwhile, having the obstacle of Taylor with the
Yes.
actor and stuff too,
And only having him for like 8 days.
right?
So as much as I love the second half of the movie, I had to admit the first half is like, excuse me, not as rich, not as dense.
Right.
However, the movie goes by so quickly that like all that stuff in the first half is so well directed. It's fun to watch anyway.
Yeah.
Even if it is a noticeable step down from the first one.
Right.
So for me, that's like a half star down.
That makes sense.
Because I gave the first one 5.
Good point.
So the first one I think is
believe
an
you gave it a
all-time
5.
classic.
Wow.
It's the perfect movie.
Wow.
It's the best movie ever made.
Wow.
Planet of the Apes.
Okay.
There was a Planet of Apes, Winter. I'm telling you.
A Planet of Apes?
Of apes. There was
Okay.
a whole Planet of Apes. It's insane.
Yeah, there was.
But yeah, that brings us, I guess, to the end of this episode.
And I guess we'll just end in a similar way. We'll just fade into white.
Fade into
Pressing a
white.
button.
Well, first let's plug our stuff.
Okay.
Let's plug our stuff. Where can we find you, Winter?
On Instagram.
On Instagram?
I am at Cinematic Witchcraft.
Cinematic Witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And on Instagram, my film page is DCR Films. That's where we post our memes and our fun stuff and this art stuff that we make.
Mm-hmm.
If you enjoyed this podcast, leave a 5-star rating on your podcatcher of choice. Subscribe. This isn't on YouTube. I don't know why I'm saying hit the bell.
Slam that bell.
Slam that bell. But yeah, I don't know. What did we say at the end of the last episode? I totally forgot.
Punch that bell with the back of your gun and phase through it.
Yeah, hell yeah. Is there some quote from this movie that you want to add? Oh, yes. And as always, folks at home, in one of the countless billions of galaxies in the universe lies a medium-sized star, and one of its satellites, a green and insignificant pot. God fucking damn it. I fucked it up.
Oh my god.